And joining us right now is the economist at the University of Maryland, and he joins us frequently, Peter Morici. Good morning, Dr. Morici.
Good morning. Good morning.
I want to start with you today on something that we're going to touch on and expand and open up the phone calls at the bottom of this hour, and that is a brand new tax in your state of Maryland, the Free State. Right now, if you want to buy a pack of cigarettes, it's a $2 tax. Now they want to increase it to $3. Is this just a way for the state to make more money? This is really a tax on the poor more than anyone else, isn't it?
Well, it is, and after a certain point, the taxes get so high that people start running around them. They just drive to North Carolina, buy cigarettes in large amounts, and bring them in. If you are
you're predicting that if this happens, we'll have an underground bootlegging cigarette market.
Well, there's two levels. There's the guy who bootlegs. He goes and buys them and sells them and takes the risk that he won't get caught. And if he gets caught, he can go to jail or face a stiff fine. Okay. Then there's the guy who just goes down there and buys a lot of them while he's down there and brings them home, to use because it becomes worth it. That's much harder to crack down on. What are you going to do? Start parking Maryland state troopers outside the outlet stores in North Carolina? Some of that actually
don't give them ideas.
In the old days with liquor between Virginia and Maryland, but that was like in the 70s. Because it was so much cheaper to buy liquor in D.C. and Virginia in those days.
But because it's cigarettes, it's like politically toxic to come out and oppose this kind of tax because they're so unpopular, cigarettes. And who wants to stand up for those dirty cigarette manufacturers?
Exactly, and it does discourage youth smoking. But you have to say at what point is enough? Because a lot of people are addicted to these things and they have no choice but to pay the tax. I mean, it's hard to have sympathy for smokers because they impose, so many costs on the rest of us. They are obnoxious. There's no two ways around it. It's a terrible habit.
Yeah, well, I mean, but it's sort of the cumulative effect of what happens in the state of Maryland, which used to be called the Free State. But there's nothing free in Maryland anymore. They tax everything from the rain on down. At what point? I think your question is right. At what point is enough if you get taxed every which way you turn?
Yeah, that's right, and I think it does affect the economy of the state. It's fortunate that it's situated next to the nation's capital, has the genome industry and Johns Hopkins and so forth, but the question is how much more would it have? There was a recent study done by the Wall Street Journal and states that, where unions are strong and taxes are high, they have not experienced the manufacturing boom. It's all gone to places where, in the Midwest and the South, where you're not in particularly strong union locations, and where the taxes are more reasonable. Maryland really is taxing itself, to the point where it doesn't generate the jobs and prosperity that it should for its people.
Hey, you're a cat person.
I got this. My droid changed its.
So that was okay. So when somebody text messages Peter Morici, it meows like a cat.
Last night, this is the first time that has happened to me.
Hold on a minute, we got to talk about this for like 5 minutes. You have a kitty cat meow signal.
There's a foreign policy speech. There's and the droid just did this to me. Now come on, guys. You want to talk about economics? You want to talk about my cat that I don't even own, my synthetic cat?
All right.
Glad it wasn't some woman saying, "Come back, Peter." Jesus.
All right. Let's move on to the.
Actually, that wouldn't have been a bad thing.
Let's move on to the VA scandal here, Dr. Morici. What does this tell us? So many people. You know how this town works. All they care about is the political scalp right now. Oh, is he going to get fired or is he going to resign? We got to get our pound of flesh. But what about what's happening with the vets? And what does the VA scandal tell us about government involvement in health care?
Well, it tells us the government isn't much good at doing these kinds of things. We do not have a competent civil service. That's all there is to it. Either you get, there are exceptions. Like Justice Department's very well run, okay? But, by and large, you have lots of people who don't do the things they're supposed to do, don't deliver very good service, whether it's you're trying to order a book in the old days by phone from the GPO and you couldn't get them to answer the phone, or in this case, run a hospital, and now they're going to blame it on a doctor's shortage. The reality is they have been burying their problems, much the way General Motors does with the ignition switch, and it's terrible because this is a vital service to veterans. But it's not just the VA; it goes on in other agencies as well. If they're not being lazier than heck, you got the people over at the IRS who, you try to move some claims through the IRS when they owe you some money.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Or you try contributing to a conservative cause and seeing if they're not knocking at your door the next year. For the first time in 35 years, a guy gets audited. Why? Well, he contributed to a conservative group. I mean, we do not have a competent civil service, and the trouble here is that sooner or later Americans are going to wake up to that, and Nancy Pelosi constantly defending these boobs and Barack Obama saying there really isn't a problem isn't helpful. Whether it's, they targeted liberal organizations as well, name three, he can't, or this business that Pelosi said yesterday, firing the director of the VA would be giving in to the incompetent people that didn't do their jobs underneath him. Last I heard, it's his job to make them do their jobs and weed them out if they can't. What you've got here is a politically correct appointee who is incompetent and can't get the job done. He is just not up to it. The fact that it was revealed at this level and it's become such a scandal, that's a very different thing than if he was laboring away and it was becoming apparent in the press that despite his best efforts, he was getting a lot of resistance. The way this is blown up indicates that Barack Obama picks his managers for the wrong reasons.
All right, so the GDP fell by 1%. And
more than winter weather there, my friend.
Yeah, that's a little bit more than winter weather in the first quarter of 2014. But you have written that, the fact that we have sort of a weakened economy is not only an economic problem, it's a foreign policy problem.
Well, right. The economy has grown at less than 1.7%. Less than half the rate it did the last 20 years of the 20th century so far in this century. The Bush-Obama years, about 1.6. The Reagan-Clinton years, 3.4. During that period, there's been very significant growth in both Russia and China, and they've been plowing the money into their militaries. While we are in retreat, they are pressing ahead. And as a consequence, they didn't get the memo about peaceful resolution of disputes among civilized nations. They just didn't get it. I mean, the Chinese are bullying Filipino fishermen to drive them out of disputed waters, areas where it isn't clear who owns what. And they don't want to negotiate. They've moved a drilling rig off the shore of Vietnam. They're harassing Japanese Coast Guard vessels. And Mr. Obama, is basically, not committed American resources when the issue is disputed waters. He says we should solve this by negotiations. It reminds me of Secretary Kerry running around saying, well, Russians are threatened in the Crimea. Let's talk about it. Let's have some safeguards. Meanwhile, they're moving in the tanks. And so what's his response in Europe? He sends 150 troops to do maneuvers in Poland, right, while the Russians are massing 40,000 crack troops alongside the Ukraine. I mean, where's the greater pressure?
Right.
He doesn't have the resources anymore. That's one deficit. He doesn't have the courage because there are things that we could do despite the lack of troops on the ground. We have a superior fleet in the Mediterranean, right, and we could reduce the Russian Black Sea Navy that floats them and jets them and blockade the bloody port.
All right, Peter Morici, we're gonna.
Is on fire.
He's on fire this morning at 6:15.
And don't tell me I'm a warmonger. For God's sakes, they've committed an act of war. What does it take? Right. We have a security agreement with the Ukraine, and we're not honoring it. I mean, we're not honoring our word.
No, I know. Listen, we
talk about this every day.
Thing if he didn't pay a health care benefit, right?
Exactly.
Peter Morici, we'll leave it right
there.
Have
a good weekend, Doctor.
Yeah, have a good one.